Welcome to the 4th Blue Forge Group monthly open mic event. My name is Maxwell DeMarco. I'm an artisan working with 3 of Blue Forge's 4 divisions and a full-time on-site volunteer. Blue Forge is an entirely volunteer-run 501c3 nonprofit founded in 1989 to educate and empower artisans who have been marginalized by the mainstream. Our artisans couldn't be more different, and they might not always get along on social media, but when they gather under the Blue Forge name, the art always comes first. Tonight, we'll hear from artisans from several Blue Forge's divisions. They'll each step into the spotlight of the Black Box Studio here on the Blue Forge campus and earn this month's open mic badge, created by illustrator and actor Faith DeMarco. Without further ado,
hello, my name is Teresa DiBiase. I'm an artisan with Blue Forge Press, and I'm excited to read from my newly published book, The Second Mother. My historical novel is based on the true story of Margaret Peppers, who spent a lifetime working among marginalized people as an Episcopal deaconess, first in the Philippines and then later in the United States. Against this backdrop is the complicated relationship of Margaret and her daughter Hallie, who grew up apart from her mother. When this chapter takes place, Margaret is on a speaking tour in the United States, raising money for the Philippine mission. Mrs. Peppers, your talk on the Igorots was so fascinating. To think that people still live like this in the 20th century. How brave you missionaries must be. The round-faced matron sitting beside Margaret at the luncheon table fluttered her hands as if to emphasize the sincerity of her comments. The deaconess gave an involuntary sigh. In her presentation today at St. John's Church, Stockton, she had also spoken about the mestizas at the House of the Holy Child, but as usual, the audience craved the more exotic. Let's see what these ladies have to say about the Filipinos closer to home, Margaret thought. On her way up California's rich agricultural Central Valley, she had been surprised to see Filipino field workers, and in the riverfront district of Stockton itself, a little Manila, sandwiched among the buildings and businesses with Japanese and Chinese names. I notice you have Filipinos living in Stockton. Does St. John's have any kind of mission to them? An older woman sitting across the table, the widow of a prominent banker and lay church officer, spoke up. They're all Catholics, aren't they? St. Mary's can take care of them. My sister-in-law helps at the Lighthouse Mission. She's a Methodist, and she told me there are quite a few Filipino Protestants, said a woman about Margaret's age, a note of hesitation in her voice. Apparently, the pillar of the church, who had just spoken, was not used to being contradicted, least of all by a young whippersnapper. Well, all I know is that they are a shiftless lot, whatever they call themselves. We should send them all back to the islands, opined Mrs. Know-it-all, glancing around the table with satisfaction as several heads nodded in agreement. Should the Episcopal Church then take care of them there? Margaret wanted to say, but held her tongue. She was tired of being pleasant, tired of making allowances for willful ignorance, even downright malice. Thank God I'm going back to L.A. tomorrow, she thought. It was Margaret's good fortune that she was staying with a young woman who had dared to contradict Mrs. Know-it-all. Jenny Martin was her name, and she lived with her husband, an accountant, and their son not far from the church. I wish St. John's would join the Methodists and Presbyterians at the Lighthouse Mission, Mrs. Martin said without preamble over dinner, evoking a puzzled expression on the face of her husband, who had not been party to the earlier conversation. They do a lot of good there, I'm told. As much as Margaret favored improving the lot of immigrants, she felt the Episcopalians should have their own mission, where they could offer dignified Anglican worship and sound religious teaching, and not some kind of watered-down Protestant mishmash. When she said as much, Mr. Martin suddenly jumped into the conversation. He explained that he had been raised a Congregationalist, but had fallen away from organized religion, partly from disgust at the denominational infighting he'd witnessed. If the Methodists and Presbyterians can cooperate, more power to them, he said. Maybe when Christian churches start to demonstrate that they actually love one another, pagans will listen to them. I know I will. Mrs. Martin cast Margaret a rueful glance. Apparently this was a familiar refrain in her household. The deaconess remembered Father Henningsen, who had attacked anyone who did not see eye to him. How many Igorots had refused to join the church because of him? As she lay down that night, tired from the long day, her thoughts turned from advancing the Episcopal mission in the Philippines to advancing her cause with Hallie, whom she would see in a couple of days. She had rehearsed various approaches in her mind, but none had revealed itself as the obvious choice. Help me, she prayed to God for the umpteenth time. Make me as persuasive as St. Peter preaching to the crowds in Jerusalem. I don't need 3,000 converts, only one. In her dream, she was back at the house of the Holy Child, teaching the younger girls how to hem a handkerchief. A couple of the more adept ones were helping others with the task, and everyone seemed absorbed in their work. Margaret walked among the children, looking at their progress, occasionally stopping to praise and encourage. She smiled in satisfaction, thinking how pleased the bishop would be when he came to visit. Suddenly the door to the classroom burst open, and to her astonishment, Father Henningsen and Marguerite Wolfson appeared. "We're married now," Marguerite announced, causing her to wonder what had become of the first Mrs. Henningsen. It clearly hasn't improved his disposition any, Margaret thought, as she saw the priest looking about with disdain. He started to open his mouth to deliver what she was sure would be a cutting remark when his wife spoke up. "We've come to assume control of the orphanage," Marguerite said. "The Board of Missions has decided that unless Hallie comes to live with you here, you must go home to America." "But she is coming to live with me," Margaret responded. "Julia is bringing her on the steamer." "You have 29 minutes to produce her, and if not, we're taking over." She crossed her arms and began tapping her foot impatiently. Margaret rushed out of the room and began running to the dock. Everything seemed to impede her. Suddenly, there was one of the cloudbursts that brings life to a halt in Manila, forcing everyone to run for cover. Margaret needed to cross the Pasig River, but the waters were rising rapidly. Soon it would flood, and then how would she get to the dock? "I only have a few minutes left," she thought despairingly. Sure enough, the river topped its banks as easily as a child jumps over a stick. All manner of things floated her way: a man's hat, produce from the market, even a pig and a chicken. Then Margaret spied a black and yellow sea snake swimming directly towards her, its flattened tail rhythmically moving back and forth like a rudder. As it neared, it grew larger and larger until its head was the size of a human's and its body a foot in diameter. She watched in horror as the snake slithered right up to her feet, its head beginning to rise like a cobra's. Go away," she yelled, but the snake paid no heed. Slowly, its head began to change into the likeness of a human's. Not just any human, There were the narrow blue eyes of her sister-in-law, the snub nose, the thin lips. Then the lips began to speak. "I have your daughter," the creature Margaret recognized as Martina said. "She needs to come with me right away," Margaret cried. "If you want her, you must have me," came the throaty response. "Look." And as the snake stretched out before her, Margaret saw for the first time a bulge distending the otherwise cylindrical body. Panic seized her as she realized Martina had swallowed Hallie alive. Margaret awoke, drenched as if indeed having been in a downpour, her hands clenching the corner of her sheet. She sobbed uncontrollably as she twisted the wad of fabric tighter and tighter. It was Wednesday, February 14, 1923, her 29th birthday. That weekend at the McCormick's, after opening the box of airmail stationery Hallie had brought her as a birthday present, Margaret spoke to her daughter of the gift she most longed to take back with her to the Philippines. "I miss you, dearest, and I want us to live together," Margaret said, simply, abandoning any further efforts at persuasion. Hallie turned away. No words were needed, but a minute later the child spoke. "No," she said, her young voice etched with a terrible finality. "I won't go."
Hi, I'm Bree Indigo. I work with Blue Forge Press and Blue Forge Films primarily, but I have worked as a volunteer with Blue Forge since 2008. Today I'm going to be reading a little middle section from my short story in Toxic, which was part of the Unnerving Anthology, and it was last year's volume. My story is called The Changeling. Under a starless winter sky, the queen stood at her turret window staring into oblivion, waiting for the king's return, but the night was silent, and the sigh that escaped her lips formed a small cloud that quickly dissipated, leaving the queen to stare out into the vast, dark void once more. Suddenly she saw it, a single, perfect snowflake, making a slow, gentle descent into the queen's outstretched palm. "The prince is coming," she whispered to the night. With a roar, the queen brought her child into the world, and after the royal arborist gently wiped away blood and earth, he presented the swaddled infant to the new mother. "The princess, your majesty." The king returned in the spring, and the young rulers were overjoyed to have the heir they had wished for after so very long. But as the child grew, they realized she was not quite what they had expected. She screamed for her mother, only to leave a ring of bite marks around the queen's neck, and snuck into the royal kennels in the deepest part of the night to touch the cat's eyes, which glittered like jewels in the darkness. She was a wild thing, crushing berries and rosebuds in her fist, shouting at the sky with absolute abandon, running through puddles and rolling in the dirt, red clay streaked across her face and coating her dark, tangled hair until she appeared more Gollum than child. The monarchs brought her to court dressed in ivory and gold, her hair in perfect spiral curls, and presented her to the other nobility. "This is our daughter, Briar Rose." But when she met the other children, the girls were afraid to stain their dresses with paint or mud, preferring tea parties and dolls, while the boys snickered and shoved her, proclaiming, "We don't play with girls." She knew she would never, ever be one of them. If the king had been disappointed in his lack of a son, he never showed it, though Briar Rose always wished he would invite her for the annual wild hunt, like all the sons riding alongside their fathers. The queen was loving, though mercurial, quick to criticize, often indifferent, but somehow always disappointed. Briar found her sanctuary far from the judgmental stares of the monarch and court, deep in the west wing and nestled in an alcove in the furthest reaches of the royal library, surrounded by her favorite books. Here she was alone, but never lonely, head and heart filled with stories who became her most trusted companions. One day, while buried in the cryptid compendium, she encountered a chapter she'd never read, though the tattered tome was a favorite. The story of the changeling, a fairy child left in place of a stolen baby, raised by human parents who were often none the wiser. Though sometimes, when a child was strange, unusual and curious, sickly but ravenous, wise beyond their years, delighted in destruction, sometimes the changeling would be found out, tested and revealed by fire, eggshells, or iron. Briar stared at her hand for a long moment, then caught her own gaze reflected in the dark window, her eyes haunted, skin pale and ghostly, tangled dark curls a wild silhouette. She gathered the tome against her chest, easily navigating the dimly lit maze of bookshelves and towering stacks, quickly retracing her steps to her private quarters. She rummaged through drawers, finding delicate hairpins and the heavy sewing scissors that once belonged to her grandmother. Holding a hairpin between two fingers, she regarded it carefully, but the metal was soft, bending under pressure, and she frowned. The elegant pin was silver. The scissors were sturdy and seemed ancient, like they had always been and always would be, but Briar's frown remained, certain the scissors couldn't be silver or copper or gold, but unclear how to discern between steel and iron. She pressed the cold metal against the warm, pale skin of her wrist and forearm. The dull blade elicited goosebumps, but nothing else. Moonlight guided her path as Briar snuck out, past the kennels with their jewel-eyed cats, through the rose garden and the berry orchard, past the royal arboretum, to the stables where most of the chickens nested high in the rafters above the other animals. She pulled an egg out from under a broody hen, who pecked Briar half-heartedly, then clucked and resettled on her clutch of eggs, while Briar lit a candle, quickly checking to make sure the egg wasn't growing, and cracked the shell carefully into two halves, letting the yolk run out onto the earth as she retraced her steps back to the rose garden. Her reflection in the bird bath was clear, like fine glass, and the night was still, as if every living thing was watching and holding its breath with her, the tension thick as she dipped the shells in her trembling hands into the water. She closed her eyes, lifting the eggshells above her head, letting the water run down her face and hair in cold rivulets. Then Briar exhaled, ready to see her true self revealed. But when she forced her eyes open, the face reflected hadn't changed, and Briar crushed the eggshells in her fists, throwing them into the grass, a frustrated sound escaping her throat. Laying in bed, Briar watched the moon cross the cobalt sky through her window before it sank into the obsidian tree line. As the sun finally began to rise, a spark ignited, small at first, barely a firefly, but quickly catching fire.
Hello, my name is Marshall Miller. I work with both Blue Portage Press and Blue Portage Films. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from my book, Jade Eyes. The main character of this book is a special agent with Homeland Security, and she's basically has just started the job, so she's on a probationary status, but she's had a further work experience prior to coming to law enforcement, so she's more mature than the average, quite often entry-level employee. And this is after the situation where they wound up having to arrest an individual involved with human trafficking, and they're trying to contact one of the suspects who's at the hospital being detained. Providence Hospital, Seattle. Kim pulled a Mustang into a slot not far from the emergency entrance. Rex was out and walking before she realized, so she had to hurry to catch up. Rex flashed his badge at the hospital security officer, who nodded as Rex and Kim walked by. Rex went to a bank of elevators, caught one just opening, strode in and pushed the fifth floor button. They have a friend on the fifth floor in a special room under guard, explained Rex. What's his name? Asked Kim. Right now they have him listed under Tong, replied Rex. He won't give us a name. Played half dead. No records from his fingerprints? Kim queried. Nope, the senior agent answered. Either born here or smuggled in. Rex looked at Kim. Hope you can use your magic from your Mandarin, he said. Kim smiled and replied, I'll try. In front of the hospital room, towards the end of the hall, was a tall and bored-looking Seattle police officer. He stood as they approached, smiled at Rex. T-Rex, thought you retired, the officer said. Rex grunted. Not yet, he replied. Agent Cooper, please meet Corporal William Budd. I've known him for years. Kim shook hands with the officer as she introduced herself. Kim Cooper, sir, pleased to meet you. Bud flushed a wide smile. The other young lady who kicked butt the other day downtown, said Bud. Pleased to make your acquaintance. Kim shrugged a bit. Just doing what I had to, she said. Well, what you had to made the rest of us warm and fuzzy, stated William Budd. The corporal looked at Rex. You want some private one-on-one, right? Yes, sir. The SPD officer produced a clipboard. Sign here. You beat everyone, Bud said. The Phoebes tried to say the guy was off limits. Our chief said we had a separate case of pound sand. Bud grinned. After kowtowing to them because of all that original federal supervision crap, telling them pound sand felt good. Kim and Rex slid into the hospital room. Lying handcuffed to the bed was a Chinese man whose face had been rearranged by Alan White. The man's left eye was bandaged over, and the right was swollen, along with the rest of his face. But he still was able to recognize Kim. Lawyer! I want a lawyer! He cried out through the swollen lips in accented English. I don't think he likes you, Kim, opined Rex. Kim harumphed, then spoke in Mandarin. Go ahead, get a lawyer. It won't do you any good. Their friends all left you except for the one shot. If no one claims him, identifies him, he'll be buried in a pauper's field. Something in Kim's words must have hit a nerve, or a tongs, as he yelled back in Mandarin. If that son of a dog had not betrayed us, my cousin would still be alive. And what son of a dog would that be? Kim asked. The suspect realized he had said too much, clamped his mouth shut, and glared at Kim with his one swollen eye. Rex laughed. Well, I only caught a few words of that. But did he insult someone? Rex asked. He said a son of a dog betrayed him, and his cousin, the dead one, replied Kim. Rex grunted. Well, Chuckles just gave us another lead, stated Rex. We'll have to let the Asian community know he cooperated with us. Injured man started to say something, then clamped his mouth tight. Come on, Kim. We'll let the Phoebes sweat it out of him. Bye-bye now, Rex said as he gave a little wave at the man, who began to mumble under his breath as the two agents left the room. Well, young lady, explained Rex, that spontaneous explanation maybe get thrown out of court due to his demanding a lawyer first. But we now know that someone else planned this. Someone that Nimrod in there thinks betrayed them. Why? Asked Kim. Because John Wang showed up and kept me from getting shot? Who knows, the senior agent answered. There are those bad guys who are so paranoid that if something else goes wrong, it must be that someone snitched on them. Like all those conspiracy theorists on late night radio. Everything happens because someone screwed things up behind the scenes. He looked at Kim as they entered the elevator. By the way, he asked, does son of a dog mean son of a bitch? Yes, basically, explained Kim. Although if someone called your father a dog in China, it would also be an insult. So Bill Clinton being a dog because he couldn't keep his flies zipped, continued Rex. Roosters and rabbits have more to do with the phallic and fertility symbols in China than dogs, Kim replied. Now that we beat that horse to death. Kim Cooper, I'm indeed blessed today. The familiar voice of John Wang rang out as Rex and Kim exited the elevator. Kim smiled as he approached. Spoke before he could. start over again. Kim smiled as he approached, spoke before Rex could. John, may I ask you why you were at the hospital? Not bad news about someone you know, I hope. John waved the statement away with a flip of his hand. No, thank God, the Chinese businessman said. I'm here working on a new treatment center that the Seattle Asian Business Association is helping to fund. It will help deal with the elderly and needy members of our community. I'd swear you were stalking us, John, Rex stated. At least you seem to be following a certain female agent. Well, my friend, why would I follow a rough-looking man like you? John replied. Even if I were gay, I would still not find you attractive. With all due respect, of course. Rex laughed and responded, Insult me, then apologize. If that is not Chinese culture around here, I don't know what is. The three then all laughed as John moved closer to Kim. He gently brushed his left hand with his fingers as he smiled and looked into her eyes. I hope you have not been brought here by sickness, he asked. No, John, just our job. John made a show of cupping his chin in his hand, furrowing his brow in a pantomime of deep contemplation. Let me think, the Chinese businessman said, then widened his eyes and snapped his fingers. I know. You came to see an injured Chinese man who had the misfortune of assaulting 2 federal agents. Rex snorted, then responded. I should have known that the Asian intelligence system in our community would know what is happening as quickly as we do. The Asian Business Association president laughed. But of course, John said. Next, you will be accusing me of being the typical inscrutable Asian. Kim tried not to giggle like a little schoolgirl. For some reason, John made her feel like she was still in high school, enjoying the days before a person had to deal with such adult subjects as crime and death. Rex noticed a change of demeanor in his young partner, and he smirked. Well, excuse me for a moment, he said. I need to visit the little boy's room. You keep Kim company, right, John? For my friend T-Rex, of course. As Rex walked away, Kim leaned in a bit closer to speak. I haven't had a chance to really thank you. If you had not shown up when you did, I could have been. John waved the rest of the remark away as he spoke. Please, let us not dwell on what could have been, what could have gone wrong. Let us instead think about what is right, he smiled broadly at Kim. And what I think is right at this minute is to ask you to dinner. Would Friday night be okay? Kim broadly smiled as she replied, I would like that. However, because of my work in this investigation, you are afraid you will be called away, yes? John asked. Well, my dear, it just so happens that the dinner I'm asking you to attend is both the opening of my new restaurant nightclub bar, the Jade Palace, as well as a charity auction of Chinese art. Thus, all the who's who of the Asian community will be there, not to mention other local dignitaries. John gently took her left hand in his as he continued. You can tell the powers that be that this is an excellent opportunity for a young special agent to develop excellent sources of information in the sometimes closed Asian community, especially a young and pretty lady who speaks Mandarin like a native. Kim blushed a bit, then smiled again and answered. Then, I'll plan on attending. The dress is formal? Yes, John replied. If I may be so bold as to suggest a nice dress of East Indian style and fashion, it will help others to realize, as I have, your unique beauty. Kim looked down, a bit embarrassed at the compliment. Please, I'm just like many others, she tried to say. John interrupted. No, my jade-eyed beauty, he said in Mandarin. You're far from being like many others. I look forward to having you next to me at this auspicious occasion. Kim looked into his eyes, saw a twinkle that she knew she reflected in her own. She felt a sudden urge to kiss him. John gently squeezed her hand. Now I must be off, he said. You have the card with my private line and office address. If you ever need to contact me, just go there and show the card. My people will run to find me. Now, until Friday night. Yes, John. I look forward to it, Kim answered with a lilt in her voice. John flashed one more smile, gave a short bow, and was off. When Rex returned from his foray into the world of the hospital restrooms, he found Kim standing with a small smile and a faraway look on her face. Well, let me guess, the man known as T-Rex said. Prom date, right? Kim pulled herself back to reality as she replied, You know, if you did not remind me of some of my uncles I know, I'd be angry with your nosiness. But in spirit of the question, yes, I have a prom date. Rex flashed an infrequent smile. You know the musical South Pacific by Rodgers and Hammerstein, he asked. Yes, why? Well, there's a song that goes like this. Hello, young lovers, wherever you are. Rex began to sing off key. You know, Rex, interrupted Kim, at the Academy they often use a concept that would become very familiar with. And what is that, pray tell? You know why they don't send donkeys to school? The young adult asked her training agent. They don't like smartasses, Rex Moyer. Rex chuckled. Oh, like I haven't heard that before.
Hi, my name is Amber Rainey. I work with Blue Forge Press and Blue Forge Films. I am going to be reading an excerpt from a short story called Wailing. It's in my compilation of short stories called Path Less Traveled. Wailing was originally published in one of the Unnerving anthologies. It was the March entry. And the story, without giving too much away, centers around Irish superstitions. I watch you gather up your things and walk out of the cottage. I don't follow, and I don't understand why. I try to tell myself it is because we aren't speaking. We haven't spoken in so long, and I don't remember why we stopped. I am helpless to break the impasse, the unseen force continuing to force me in my place, and the wailing increasing to unbearable volumes. I try to scream to the rafters, but the wailing drowns me out. I don't know how long I continue struggling with myself and pleading for it to end. I can't live like this anymore. I can't let us grow apart and it be all my fault for my stupid beliefs in magic. Magic was supposed to be joyful, not sorrowful. I berate myself for being so foolish and lash out at myself, rocking back and forth in my chair with my hands over my ears in an attempt to drown out the wailing and cling to what little sanity I have left. I am startled by a hand on my shoulder and nearly fall off the chair. Suddenly, as if you'd never left, you kneel in front of me, taking my hands and wiping my cheeks dry with your thumbs. You smile at me, one full of love and sadness. You can stop now, my love, you say to me. I'm confused, shaking my head at the first words he has spoken to me in a very long time. Then I realize what has happened. The wailing has stopped. I hold my breath, waiting for it to begin again, and it seems you do as well. The patience in your eyes speaks volumes, and for once I feel truly understood. We wait like that for an eternity before you squeeze my hands. I look down at you and smile with trepidation. I don't understand what has happened to make you look at me with such love again, but I don't really care. As if understanding my needs, you lean up and kiss me, pouring out all of your pent-up emotions. It's the best kiss we have ever shared. Reluctantly, I pull away and rest my forehead against yours. I wait for your eyes to open and meet mine before I ask the question burning in my head. How did you make it stop? It was you, love. You could have made it stop, but you didn't, so I helped you, you explain. I don't understand. Come with me. You take my hand and we go out of the little cottage. It is cold, but I don't seem to feel it anymore. We walk through the fields towards the home of the owners of our little cottage. It is bustling with activity. Children are playing a game in the yard, and they pay us no mind as we pass them and go inside. Once there, I notice adults milling about in various hushed conversations. The owner's wife is standing to one side, sniffling into her handkerchief while the woman who runs the grocery consoles her and conceals a sniffle of her own. I look at you, still not understanding, and you just smile at me and lead me to a couple of empty chairs. A woman near us shudders, crosses herself, and moves to a different part of the room. I am about to call her out for her uncharacteristic rudeness when you put a hand in mine and squeeze. We sit in the chairs, and I am still confused, but unwilling to question your motivations. I just got you back, and I am loath to rock the boat and cause a scene that would embarrass you and push you away again. Everyone in the room avoids our little corner, and I can observe them with unfettered curiosity. The owner's wife passes around a plate of biscuits and politely chats with her guests. All of her guests except us, who continue to cross themselves at periodic intervals in their conversations. I finally pick up on one of them. "It's a tragedy, really, but probably for the best," a man says to the owner's wife. "Yes, poor dears. Perhaps he would have recovered if not for the banshee. The fairy folk themselves must have cursed her. I warned them about the fairy ring, but that young lady was wild and impulsive." I look at you in horror, hoping you haven't heard them, but you are staring at me with such intensity. Your eyes hold knowledge that I long to unravel, and yet you aren't speaking again. I can see the pleading in them for understanding, but I can't seem to grasp the point they are trying to make. "I'm lost. Help me," I beseech. "You have to remember. I can't make you do it." I want to run from the cottage, the air suddenly feeling stale and stuffy. I stand up and a draft blows through the room, all in attendance crossing themselves in unison. It is too much for me, and I push past everyone, running outside. My head hurts and I feel like I'm going to vomit. I know the moment you joined me, I can feel your warmth. You make everything around me seem a little brighter. We can be together again if you only remember. I look up into your eyes full of love and trust. You believe in me. I am searching for the answers, but I only see your patience. I close my eyes, hunting through my memories, trying to find the answer to the puzzle. When did we stop speaking? When did we last fight? My brain reminds me of the fight about the fairy ring, and I scoff at it. Surely we'd fought since then. Our marriage was never perfect, but we fought and made up dozens and dozens of times. What was the last thing we fought about? The more I try to remember, the more I only remember the fairy ring. I remember the fall from the wall, and then nothing. I start backing away from you, my hands held up in defense, and trying to ignore the conclusion my brain wants me to believe. I remember the car and falling from the wall, and then I remember your despair, the wailing, constant and dreadful. How did you get so gray? That's it, my love. Remembering will set us free. You comfort me. I don't want to remember this horror. I don't want any of it to be true. I always said I believed in magic and superstitions, but it is too much for me to realize it might not have been a false belief. Not if it means you are here with me. If you are here with me, then all hope is lost. I shake my head at you, denying the facts flooding into my brain. You only come closer, gathering me in your arms. I almost succumb to you, but I need the answer to the last piece of this twisted puzzle. What did you do? I ask with horror. You smile sadly and shrug. I heard you in the cottage. You were screaming at me to talk to you. That was in my head. I heard you, my love. Every March for the past 5 years, I have heard you. I couldn't bear to hear your misery any longer. I did what was needed so we could be together again. That wailing? It was my own personal banshee.
My name is Pauline Uvalde, and I'm an artisan at Blue Forge Press and Blue Forge Sound. Today I'll be talking about the topic of a lore Bible, specifically what it is, how I created it for my first novella thesis, and the role of the website Television Tropes and Idioms and a fan spin-off of the site called Overly Sarcastic Productions, or OSP for short. I initially learned about the term Lore Bible from the trope, or loosely speaking, storytelling device from television tropes and idioms called All in the Manual, which essentially consists of plot or character information that is present outside the actual work itself, which may include tie-in novels, video games, films, and so on. This might even include context provided by the creator themselves directly. Because I'm visually impaired, oftentimes information provided all there in the manual was the only way that I could learn things about a work that otherwise I couldn't decipher through audio cues alone. Learning what a lore Bible was through this context mattered significantly while I was researching thesis and even while doing heavy revisions, because I wanted to avoid all the characters both being similar to each other and too similar to myself. So in order to create characters who were distinct in both ways, I adopted a form of method acting where in the words of television tropes and idioms, I would try to replicate the life circumstances, mannerisms, and emotional feelings of the characters that I portrayed. Obviously, life circumstances wasn't an option, so instead, I wanted to create lists of the works of fiction that each character would enjoy based off their individual experiences and personalities. This would avoid something that TV Tropes calls the small reference pools problem, where essentially they state that in certain types of fandoms, like contemporary for the time, music, film, and television, they can make references to those things assuming that the audience will understand. But if it's not a contemporary subject, or if the subject is sufficiently niche, there are very few examples of those things that characters and authors can reference safely without an audience being confused. Obviously, I couldn't purchase every single work of fiction that I wanted to use, so instead I performed text-based research and even watched Let's Plays on YouTube, and did all I could to leave my comfort zone regarding these works, especially regarding ones which I could neither experience as a consumer or even as an observer. In this way, I figured out which works each character would rely on for emotional grounding when they were distressed, or what they joked about. Lastly, I'll discuss Overly Sarcastic Projections, and specifically the Trope Talk series. This series consists of video essays on YouTube which analyze related tropes in one video, supported by examples written and delivered in the same casual, concise, yet usefully detailed fashion as the site itself. Unlike TV Tropes and Idioms itself, however, the narrator, who calls herself Red, doesn't hide her bias towards certain fandoms, or how excited she is to talk about certain fandoms. She also doesn't avoid speculating on how a trope may affect not only the creator of the work, but the experience of the audience as they see a trope being used in a work, and this includes both positive and negative effects. Even as she does this, however, Red avoids stereotyping certain tropes as good or bad. Instead, she provides examples of both as often as possible, and in this way she demonstrates that tropes are tools, which is the saying that the website uses to describe tropes which both users of the site and fans of an actual work might stereotype as good or bad. Instead, they point out these tropes as the name implies, being tools and therefore functional, and each serving a purpose. It just so happens that perceptions of these tropes and how they affect characters and audiences change over time.
Hi, my name is Jennifer DeMarco, and I work with Blue Forge Press, Blue Forge Films, Blue Forge Sound, and Blue Forge Gaming. Today I am going to be reading from a children's book that I wrote that was illustrated by my son, When Longneck Learned to Love. This cute little tiny book is in its 10th edition, and it has just seen new editions of a coloring book, a full color hardback, and a full color paperback. So I'm really quite proud of it. And the reason I decided to read it today is because even though I wrote this story for my son, who is very creative, I came to realize many, many years later that I think I actually wrote it for myself. And also, I think it's an important lesson that all artisans should hear. When Longneck Learned to Love, by Jennifer DeMarco, illustrations by Maxwell DeMarco. Longneck stretched his long neck out on a warm stone and sighed a deep, long sigh. "What's wrong, son?" his mother asked carefully, because growing long necks can be sensitive. "I want to tell a story," Longneck confessed, "but I'm afraid it won't be good enough." "Good enough for what?" his mother asked. "Good enough to tell," Longneck sighed again. "All stories are good enough to tell," his mother smiled. "If your heart says, tell the story, then listen to your heart." But Longneck only closed his eyes and let the sun lull him to sleep. The next day it rained, and Longneck stood in the wet sand and pebbles at the edge of the lake and sighed, because growing long necks sigh a lot. "What is it, son?" his mother asked when she came to the lake for a drink. "I want to draw a picture in the wet sand." Longneck looked down at the shore and shuffled his feet. "But I don't think it will be good enough." "Good enough for what?" his mother wondered. "Good enough for people to compliment and praise," Longneck explained. "I don't think compliments make a picture good," his mother offered. "Art is subjective." Longneck was confused. What does subjective mean? "It means everyone has their own opinion, and no one opinion is right or wrong." And his mother stepped away to find some leaves to eat, high up in the trees. About a week went by, and once again Longneck was sighing. This time he lay on his back with his feet in the air and the moonlight and stars shining down on his belly. His mother walked by on her way to chorus club with the other Longneck parents, but she paused and asked, "What's keeping you up so late, my son? Why aren't you dreaming of leaves and fresh water and the cool wind on your face?" "I can't dream of those things," Longneck said with a sigh, "because sighs are a big part of the language of growing long necks. I'm too busy worrying that I'll never have an idea as bright as the moon or as vast as the stars. I may never do anything great, and then I will never be great." When she heard this, Mother Longneck sank down beside her son. She lay her long neck next to his and was just silent and with him for a long time. After the seconds turned to minutes and the minutes turned to an hour, Longneck turned his head and looked at her. "Aren't you going to tell me that I'm great just as I am?" Mother Longneck smiled softly, as most Mother Longnecks do, and said, "My beloved boy, to me you have been great since you drew your first breath. But until you see yourself as great, there is nothing more that I can do. Longneck blinked his eyes and looked back at his mother, looking at him. For just one moment, he saw himself as she saw him. For just one heartbeat, he saw himself as great. And that one moment was enough to change everything. He told his story, and it was great. He drew his picture, and it was great. He shared his ideas and his voice and his kindness and his strength, and because he loved himself, he found love everywhere he went. Even when times were dark, even when he found himself alone or worried or afraid, he found love because he carried it inside himself. Every dawn and every dusk, to the corner of the earth and to the edge of the sea, even all the way to the end of his days, Longneck knew he was worth it, and he was great, because Longneck loved himself.
Thank you for joining us for the 4th Blue Forge Group Monthly Open Mic. This video was filmed on April 25th, 2026, and was made possible by viewers like you. Find out everything about us and how you can support an inclusive, nonpartisan, art-centric nonprofit at www.blueforgegroup.org.